Our most sacred experiences are bound to us in quiet ways. We enter the temple to make covenants and receive promises that God will reveal himself to us in the sanctifying of our ordinary lives. Our obedience, our actions in day-to-day situations are quiet contributions to his kingdom. I want to emphasize that it will be the same in your law school education. In the small and simple things of your law school experience, great things will come to pass, and those things will be sacred. Seeking for justice won't make the study of the law sacred, and for a disciple of Christ, it should be sacred. I loved reading this and the way she talked about how this day-to-day grind of law school can be a sanctifying experience as we choose it to be so. Also in law school, I got to know Judge Tom Griffith, who recently stepped down from the DC Circuit. He was the highest ranking judge, LDS judge in the country. And he was BYU legal counsel for a while. And he wrote a seminal talk that I would recommend to you as well called The Lawyer and the Atonement. And he talks about how not just being in law school, but being a disciple of Christ and being a lawyer should be a sacred experience as well, that we are invited and enticed to enter into the garden and into the grove to, as he says, reach us in the direction of a Zion society by clothing the naked, feeding the hungry, liberating the captive, and administering relief to the sick and afflicted, and become at one with God and our fellow travelers. So he ties together a lot of doctrine, but there's another quote that I wanted to share with you about how he relates the experience that Joseph Smith had in the Grove to us as lawyers. He says, when the boy Joseph Smith went into the grove of trees on the morning of that beautiful, clear day, early in the spring of 1820, he was driven there by two related purposes. The first, which he stressed in his earliest known account of the first vision, was to repair his relationship with God. He went seeking forgiveness of his sins, as we learn. A relationship that had been strained by the withering effects of sin. The second purpose, featured more prominently in the 1838 account of the first vision, canonized in our scripture, involved community building. Which church should he join? And then Griffith says, those two questions are intertwined and inseparable. Our discipleship must involve both. How do we become at one with God? How do we become at one with our fellow travelers? The answer to both is the same, even and especially for lawyers, by participating in the atoning sacrifice of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and making that ongoing act of mercy and grace the foundation for all we do. So I really identified with the concept that tying together, making our law school experience sacred, but also this concept of being a disciple of Christ and being a lawyer means that we are to pursue our calling, as our profession as a calling, and that we are to clothe the naked and feed the hungry and liberate the captive and administer relief to the sick and afflicted, and that we do that through the law. So with all of these, Vicki Joe Anderson's book, The Other Eminent Men and Women, with Jane Wise's talk, and with Tom Griffith's Lawyering and the Atonement, I felt that these were shaping experiences for me, and I wanted to share them as this invitation to identify our secular calls within the law as women. Rebecca?
Thanks, Lorianne. I believe that a helpful framework to approach the topic of leadership in our professions is that of vocation. We don't often use the term vocation in the church. It's most commonly a term used in other churches, but it's a beautiful lens through which we can view our opportunities for leadership. So what is the concept of vocation? It's the idea that God calls us to individually walk a particular path of divine service. And more specifically, it's an internal awareness of one's desire to serve in a specific capacity that matches our internal talents and passions. It's the things that we feel in the depths of our souls that God has called us to do. So we can view our call to pursue the law as merely a job, or we can view it as a spiritual vocation. And professional venues can at times detract from our spiritual vocations. We may think, I'm here, I'm working, this is a job, it is what it is. But I would submit that it matters tremendously how it is we view our work. Work provides us with the financial means to pay the rent or the mortgage or to meet our other financial responsibilities, but is that all that it is? Most working people spend a significant portion of their lives, of the many hours of their weeks, working and working and working. So it really does matter how we answer this question. Is it simply a job, or is it something more? Or is it a means by which I can make a difference in the world? Is work something small, or is it about the life of the world? Some might view work narrowly as separate from our spiritual life, such that the holiness of the work is overlooked. But it's my belief that if you've been called to the law, you've been called here for a purpose, and the Lord has in mind a vocation for you. We can view work as a participation in the creative action of God, in the work of creation itself, and therefore as a means of sanctification. Work serves or can serve or should serve to facilitate and encourage us to become more fully human and therefore receptive to the divine. Work experience plays a tremendously important part in bringing us to the realization of the fullness of our existence and our potential as humans. And as the words of one author, Randy Lee, said, let me pull this quote up for you. Woman then does not work because she does not have the wealth stored up or to constantly be at rest. Woman works because her dignity is in creating. Woman was created not simply for wages, but she was created to work. It is in work that woman's divine nature is displayed. This sense of work as participation in the act of creation as a means for realizing our full potential as humans, it comes from our creation in the image of God and the dignity of our lives as daughters of God. The purpose of work is to create, and the purpose of creation is to actualize our potential as beings created in the image of God. A caution here, I think we all need to remember that vocation is not static. We should view it as a verb, not a noun. There's a danger that once we name the thing to which we are called, we may begin to live in a static definition that keeps us from being open to God's call in each moment and prevents us from meeting the needs of our world. Another quote I would like to share here. It might help to think of vocation as a verb rather than a noun. It is an ongoing attentiveness, an ongoing listening to an ever unfolding process called out by God. Our gifts are directions to us of how to engage with the world in this service vehicle of vocation, and they keep directing us as they, the landscape, and we keep changing. Secular success means furthering our careers, and many fear that making changes from what they've done will look too much like a failure. Related to this is the common fallacy that one author referred to as the "I've invested too much in this to stop now" principle. There's a temptation to stay in our current position long after it becomes clear that it no longer aligns our gifts and our desires with the needs of the world. These tendencies are aggravated by the fact that success in our careers is often measured by how much we have. But what I would like to share is that I believe that discernment of vocation is not a one-shot deal. It's a lifelong process. And we need to have sensitivity to the fact that God may have different plans for us at different times. That can be difficult because it means that the best we can ever say is, I am where I am supposed to be right now, but I need to be open to the fact that God may want me to do something else at a different time. Lorianne?
Thanks, Rebecca. I guess I wanted to add to this concept of change in our vocations that Elder Maxwell often talked about the fellowship of Christ's suffering. And I think that part of that fellowship is the willingness to accept the Lord's timing and to apply our time and talents and everything with which the Lord has blessed us in the way that he deems appropriate. So now we want to shift into how pursuing our callings can look different for each of us, and in light especially of our other calls. We know from the Family Proclamation that women are also called to be mothers, and that, as we know from Sister Du, can be as mothers with children, or Eve was called the mother of all living even before she had children. So it's something we're all called to do, regardless of the status of childbirth for each of us. And that as we pursue that, as we pursue our formal church callings, and Rebecca will talk about other callings that we have, there's this question of, how do we do this? Do we do this full time? Do we do this in seasons? Do we do this part time? Do we do this as volunteers? And when I was a first year, in between my first and second year of law school, I had the wonderful opportunity to write an institute-like lesson that we'll send out as part of the materials with this talk, in conjunction with a faculty member, an LDS faculty member in Arizona, and Dean Kathy Pollins at BYU Law. And I was able to pull together resources about women in the law from an LDS perspective. And one of them was a wonderful talk by Bruce Hafen at Education Week, where he talked, it's called Principles, Preferences, Principles and Preferences. And he talks about how we have principles and preferences, and then our priorities and preferences and the Lord's principles. And sometimes we can get those three things confused, and the Lord's principles with our preferences. He talked about how there was an LDS publication for women, and no matter what kind of article they wrote, whether or not it was about a working mom or a stay-at-home mom, the editor would continually get emails from disgruntled women in the church criticizing the underlying messages, doctrinal or otherwise, in what was being written. And Rebecca, if you can share the quote that Elder Hafen then said, even when we eliminate differences of preference, personality, and circumstances, so that we're talking only about principles, meaning the Lord's principles, all situations will not yield the same results, because the natural and often unavoidable paradox of competing true principles. Let me just pause here before I go on with this quote. Competing true principles is a really complex doctrinal concept that I continue to learn from in this talk. And the most essential and kind of elementary competing true principles are mercy and justice. We can also think of the call for women to get all the education that they can, as well as to pursue the work of the world, as well as this divine call to motherhood. And in the same moment, because we live in 2D time, in the same moment, it's not possible to follow both of those principles at the same time. So like Nephi commanded to kill Laban in a society, in a spiritual and legal system that says thou shalt not kill, but yet to preserve this record in the land, he had two competing true principles, and he had to use the Spirit to choose which true principle he was to follow in that moment. So now I'll move on with this quote. And Elder Hafen says, how essential it is for us to let people govern themselves and be themselves in circumstances in which they apply competing true principles and consider appropriate matters of preference. And the key here, as Elder Hafen says, is following the Spirit. So this principle for me allows me to take a deep sigh of relief and know that I can't pursue in the same moment in time, maybe in different hours, in different seasons of my life. And I've chosen to pursue my profession via seasons. I took a season off while my kids were little and wrote in my spare time and worked part-time while they slept. And now I work full-time while they're in school. And we need to let women to pursue this. A really dear friend of mine from law school, Patriarchal Blessing, instructs her to pursue a profession. And so she's doing that as faithfully as she can. And I think we just need to allow everybody to pursue this in the way, their callings and their vocations, in the way that they deem best in conjunction with the Spirit. Rebecca?
So Angel mentioned before a little bit about my unique pathway to motherhood. And this wasn't actually something I had planned to talk about, but I will just share very briefly a little bit about that. I consider myself a new mother. I'm 44 years old, and I've only been a mother for a couple of years. After many, many years of many challenges in that realm, my husband and I were able to adopt 4 children, 4 siblings, biological siblings from foster care, when we were living in Chicago. And they are wonderful, amazing children. I'm thinking we're all about to have birthdays. So Maria is 15, Jesus is 14, Manuel is 12, and Roxana is 10. And they definitely bring a depth of purpose and meaning to my life and meaning to my practice of the law every day. I do want to recognize, though, that not all of us have the opportunity. I never thought I was going to have the opportunity to be a mother in this life. So many of us have so many different competing roles. We're not just in motherhood roles necessarily, but we're also daughters and sisters and friends and neighbors and board members and branch members throughout the world. They talk often of this, I've read about this concept of the sandwich generation, which is exactly where I feel like I am right now, where we've got my parents that are getting older and have their needs. And my mom broke her foot last month, and we literally have a bed in our front room across from my office right here where she's been sleeping in our front room so that she doesn't have to go up or downstairs. She's completely immobile. So we've got the parents on this side of the sandwich, and then we've got the kids on the bottom side of the sandwich. And it's this sandwich generation when we're being called to help in many different ways in our different roles. But I actually feel I have two siblings with profound disabilities. I feel like I'm in this, I don't know what I would call it, like an empanada generation or like a calzone generation, where I'm completely surrounded by the different roles that I have in my life and competing and appropriately and righteously competing things that compete for my time. But in light of our many family and community and other responsibilities, how do we approach our secular callings? And I do just want to share that I think it is so important that we take a step back and we look at our lives and we truly consider and listen to the Spirit and what the Spirit has to say to us about our vocation and our calling. So how do we go about identifying our vocational callings? A couple of the questions that I think that are really important to be asking. What do I think about in my spare time? What are my values? And how does a particular path accord with those values? What makes me feel alive? What is life-giving for me? Where does my energy flow from most naturally? I love that question. Where does my energy flow from most naturally? A vocation should reinvigorate us to have increased energy in other aspects of our lives. Howard Thurman, I'd like to share a quote from him. He was a spiritual advisor to Dr. Martin Luther King. He wrote the beautiful book, Jesus and the Disinherited. And he gave this advice about vocation. He said, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And that's my invitation to you. That's what I hope that you'll be thinking about. What is it that calls to you, that you think about in your free time, that gives you energy and excitement? That may give you some clues and some promptings in the direction that you can go to become a leader in the law. And I fully believe that our talents are developed as we respond to the calls to vocation and leadership in the law. And as President Mary Ellen Smoot, a former Relief Society General President, said, if we will faithfully accept our calls, our hidden talents will be discovered. I truly believe that. Lorianne?
Thanks, Rebecca. So now we'll transition again to talk about, Rebecca and I wanted to share a little bit about our calls, our secular calls. And my story begins when I was 16. Of course, there's a little bit of a backstory to this, but I participated in a speech competition. Some of you who are in the Provo area may be familiar with America's Freedom Festival at Provo, in which there is a speech competition. And the speech, the winner of the senior division gets to speak at the Freedom Devotional, often with a general authority, or in my case, it was with Elder Holland as well as Governor Leva at the time. And it was the first time that I was able to interact with the founders through their words, kind of on a personal level. And I was really convicted by what they wrote and the sacrifices that they made. And I determined that at that time, that at some point later in my life, I would do something to thank the founders for their sacrifice and kind of give in return. And that led, unbeknownst to me, to out of my third year of law school, I started Consource, or the Constitutional Sources Project, which was mentioned earlier. And as part of that, I got to launch. We got to launch the website in the Supreme Court courtroom. And I was a year out of law school. We were able to get Justices Scalia and Breyer to help us with this launch. And they basically did a Q&A, and it was quite funny. They should have gone on the road. They were wonderful. And Justice Scalia answered a question about the Constitutional Convention. And then he turned to me, who was 1 year out of law school, and said, Lori-Ann, is that right? And I thought to myself, is it possible that having only been out of law school 1 year, that I might know something about the Constitutional Convention, more than a justice of the Supreme Court? So that actually, oddly enough, gave me the confidence to then, a couple of years later, begin into an academic career. And then there was another pivot, another call, when my life changed a bit. I planned to get a doctorate at Oxford, and things changed. My research changed focus, and a couple of things happened to my supervisor. And I was stuck in London. My husband had moved out with me. And so I was there as a constitutional legal historian with nothing to do, was not able to get pregnant at the time, and was looking for something to do. They don't care about our Constitution necessarily in England. It's not the Revolutionary War, it's the disagreement with the states, with the colonies. Based off of some interaction I'd had as a young woman, again, as a teenager, with a BYU law professor by the name of Cole Durham, I knew that there was this thing called constitution writing. And that was, my husband at the time had me sit down and look at my goals. And he said, well, why don't you do anything with this constitution writing thing? And I said, well, I'm not old enough. He said, you know 95% more than 95% of the people. Why don't you get on this? So I just started writing. I had no idea what I was doing. I just started writing. People eventually found out what I was writing. I had the opportunity to go to Libya. I worked in the background with the UN for about a year, writing a series in a local newspaper there on constitutionalism. He would feed me ground information, and I've fed him experts in books. And then eventually there were people in Libya that wanted me to help and to translate the articles and to do some consulting work. So I had the opportunity to go out, and that actually changed. That was a pivot in my career. I was able to help with the constitution writing process in Libya. And I went out 7 months pregnant with my first. I was finally able to get pregnant. And had I gotten pregnant 1 month earlier, I would not have had that experience to go to Libya. And now I'm actually able to help them again. Another pivot was several years later, when I did not have the support of my husband to do what I needed to be doing, what I felt called to do. I had a very wise stake president who said, you keep doing this. It's like, be like the duck, where you're calm and smooth on the top in family life. And then when the kids are asleep, you work just as hard as you can. And that was advice that I carried through until another pivot 4 years ago now, when I was invited to go to Yale as a fellow. And it was unexpected. It was an on-ramp. Little did I know that my life would take another turn, and the marriage that I had crumbled. And you can't not work when you get divorced. And so I had an on-ramp ready-made for me that allowed me now to go into academia and to provide for my family. So I've been really grateful for these pivots and the opportunities that I've had, and the calls, the professional calls that have been consistent and consistently there to give me purpose and give me life and to help me come alive. Rebecca?
Thanks. I just love hearing you reflect on your experience and the ways that they built on one another to bring you to the positions of leadership that you hold in the profession at this point. When I reflect on my own journey, I think back immediately to when I was a missionary serving for the church in Southern California. I was a Spanish-speaking missionary. And through the work that I did there, I came to know and love and appreciate so many individuals, Spanish-speaking individuals who um, were experiencing challenges in their lives as relates to their immigration status. And I decided as I was a missionary that I felt that I wanted to do something in my career, in my profession relating to immigration law, but I didn't know what. Um, and that decision, I think, was really important that I made that decision based on my life experiences at that point, because taking that step forward and recognizing that decision that I'd made, I later felt that confirmed through the Spirit. And as I decided to go to law school and attend law school, I began to feel more and more called to immigration law. When I was in law school, just as a second year student, I began volunteering with Catholic Charities there in New York City. And I started volunteering and I became the coordinator for their undocumented children's project. And what this entailed was undocumented, unaccompanied children's project. So anytime there was a child who was unaccompanied alone in the entire New York metropolitan region, when they were came in contact with immigration law enforcement, I would get a call. Sometimes it would be in the middle of the night. Sometimes it'd be on the weekend. I'd get a call and I'd go and I would do basically an intake with each of these children. Almost all of them were Spanish speaking. And I would ask them about their lives and how it was that they happened to end up in the United States alone. And just to see if there was any way that we could help them, that we could have some sort of legal basis to seek relief for them so that they could stay and be protected here in the United States. I worked in that project for several years, and if I'm speaking honestly, it was a very challenging experience at a very challenging time in my life. I was teaching early morning seminary. My husband was the bishop. I was going through infertility treatments. It was just a really complex and fraught period of time in my life. And after a period of time, when I began working at Fragman, which is a business immigration firm, I decided that it wasn't the time and it wasn't the season for me to continue in that work with Catholic Charities any longer. And so with a lot of sadness, I let them know that I wasn't going to be able to participate in that any longer. And from that point, I really threw myself into my corporate legal career, working in a AmLaw 100 massive law firm, pounding the pavement, doing business development, working on business immigration cases for a variety of different types of businesses and employers across the globe. And I was really into that, and I was putting my all into it. I was on partnership track. I was raising in the ranks. And there came a period of time, though, a few years into that, I would say about 5 or 6 years into that, that I began feeling discontent. And I began feeling that I was being called to do something more. And I started hearing so much in the news about the unaccompanied minors that were, there was a surge of unaccompanied minors who were entering the United States at that time. Hundreds of thousands of these unaccompanied minors, mostly teenagers, mostly teenage boys, were coming from Central America to flee the violence and gang situations in that area and just for survival. And I'd been reading about that. I'd been seeing it on Facebook. I'd heard about people doing work, and I really felt the call that I was supposed to do something about that. And so I went into my boss, a very profit-focused and profit-driven man. And I told him that I felt that I was supposed to go down to the border and volunteer to help these children and to help them get the legal assistance that they needed in order to be protected here in the United States. And I didn't know how he was going to take that. I pretty much thought he was not going to be happy about it, just given the role I was playing. I was playing a really critical role with a very large client, leading a major account. but he sensed it. He sensed it as I spoke with him, and he said, I fully support you. I don't want you to take PTO for this. This is on the firm's dime. We're going to pay for you to go down there. You should absolutely do this. And so I went down to the border, and I was there for several weeks, working 18, sometimes 20 hours a day. Just this massive, I can't even express the volume and magnitude of the suffering of these individuals that we were working with. And I felt like I was really, really doing what God wanted me to do, to be helping them at that time. And I returned back to the firm in Chicago a couple weeks later, and I felt inspired and also somewhat enraged. And I wrote an email late at night, which I would never recommend doing. I wrote an email late at night to the chairperson of our firm, to Austin Fragman. He is the one who founded Fragman International. And I sent this email to him in which I said that it was basically atrocious that the largest immigration law firm in the world wasn't more involved in these efforts to provide relief to these individuals that were fleeing violence and harm in their countries. And I remember taking a deep breath on this gigantic email I had just written, and I hit send. And I didn't know what was going to become of that. But I awoke in the morning to discover that Austin Fragman had forwarded it to 5,000 people across the globe. And everyone got to hear of my my concern and my outrage, and my call for others to participate in that as well. And at that time, the firm committed to send attorneys down to the border, immediately sent several dozen. Since that time, the firm has sent hundreds of attorneys for 1 week to 2 week long stints at the border to provide emergency legal representation to individuals who've crossed the border. And I would just say that I didn't completely leave my corporate work. That was still a very significant part of my my day and my career and my week. But as I moved up and as I approached partnership, the work that I had done in the pro bono realm, helping refugees and immigrants, it's what distinguished me from the others that were my same year. Everybody knew who I was because Austin had forwarded this email to the whole world. So, you know, when there's a lot of people that are up for partner, and there's a name like Rebecca Van Eidert that you've seen before, and you associate something positive with it, I think that, and I was told that it was critical to the vote, to the overwhelming unanimous vote, I was told to be elected to partnership at Fragman, which is where I am today. So I feel like that was my calling at that time. I feel like now that I have 4 children, that some of my callings have shifted, and there's a time and a season for everything. But I still seek to keep my eyes and my ears open to the voice of the Spirit that I believe will guide me to know when it is that I am supposed to give pro bono service, and when it is I'm supposed to give more of my time in other ways. So that's a little bit about my personal journey and my hearing and recognizing the vocations I've been called to in my life.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's really inspiring. We now wanted to open the floor up to see if there's anybody that wanted to share how what they've been called to do, what they felt and identified as their calling within the law, part-time, full-time, or as a volunteer.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, please.
Yes, I am from the Philippines, so this is like 1 a.m. So I will not turn on my video. My
No,
face
don't.
on the screen is much better than how I look right now. So anyway, I used to be the international legal counsel for the church in the Philippines. And I am still with the church employment office of the general council as lead counsel for uh, international temple acquisitions. So the temples that have been announced, and we always have like every conference, we have the Philippines as part of the new temples side, and those were the ones that I handle like a year prior to the announcement that I'm the only one in the Philippines, at least a Filipino who knows where the temple site is. And I was very, very glad to be working for the church. Before I was considered for the position to work for the Office of General Counsel, I didn't know how much legal work it is. Uh, that a church working for the church involves. I thought it is all immigration because the missionaries are coming over to the Philippines, and yeah, they are foreigners. So I thought it's all about that, and I do not want to be just working for one particular part of the law. So at that time, so I was in real estate, and I served a mission immediately after my bar exams. So I became a lawyer while in the mission field. So at that time, while in the mission field, one of the things that I was able to do is to have a lot of people got baptized, join the church, and they were able to get baptized because before they were not able to get baptized because they were not married to their partners, since there is no divorce in the Philippines, but they had long been separated from their previous spouses and all those stuff. So they've been living in with a different partners who have actually take discussions with the missionaries but could not be baptized. And so because I am already a lawyer at that time, while in the mission field, the bar exams came out like 6 months after my mission, so I still have one more year. And yes, so one of the things that I've done is to I have reached out to at least 65 people uh, who we were teaching in Atimonan, and they have that problem. So what I did is to write up in the Philippines, if you've been living together without without impediments and all those things, you can be married without a marriage license. And so I drafted all the paperwork for them, and yeah, so at least 65 people were baptized while I was in Atimonan because of that. And then immediately after my mission, prior to my mission, one of the biggest problems of the church is that the missionaries are coming to the Philippines on a tourist visa. So the tourist visa, of course, every month they have to make extensions for so many missionaries, and that's volume. and and the applications have been, it's very toxic for the church, and they wanted a longer visa for these missionaries. So prior to to serving my mission, one of the things, the Lord putting the right person at the right time, and then at the right uh and so at that time they were looking for an a go between the church and the immigration, so that these applications will be approved. And luckily, one of the and so they identified the church office identified members of the church who are uh, uh who are LDS, active LDS, and probably could meet with the commissioner. And they have identified a lot, but some of them, they belong to a different party with the new commissioner, or they are not that active LDS. So someone wrote, my best friend wrote about me on the church magazine, and one of the employees of the church saw that publication, and they said, why don't we call Sister Ojeda, because Sister Ojeda is knows the commissioner on a personal basis, and she will be able to be a good representative. So anyway, to cut the long story short, I was able to convince the commissioner that our missionaries are really employees of employees of the church. The church has control over the means and manner of their stay in the Philippines, and so they are entitled just like an employee for a 2-year visa, and that was approved prior to my serving a mission, because the church after my mission, because they were very grateful for what had happened, that the missionaries now have a 9G commercial. There was only 9G commercial before for employees. Now there is 9G missionary visa, and so they flew me to US, and I was able to be able to have a tour in the US immediately after my mission, because of this experience that I had. And I did not join the Office of General Counsel until after like 6 years, because one of my the I serve as my district missionary, my district leader, work for the had internship with the Office of General Counsel, and introduced me to the Office of General Counsel. He said, "We've been, hearing about you, and do you want to, work for do something for the church?" So I thought it was a volunteer work. So I said, "Yeah, sure. I am willing and open," and it's something like that. And he said, "No, we want you to be like an employee for the church." And then I took a back and I said, okay, I don't want to be, just doing immigration. So what they did, they flew me to Hong Kong in order to see if I would like to work for the Office of General Counsel. And there, while deciding if I want to accept the call or the employment, actually, I met with President Hinckley. So it was. I know that the Lord has, put me at the right time, at the right place, and with the right people, in order for me to uh, fulfill my calling to be helping the church. And I so love those experiences that I had.
Thank you so much for sharing. That was remarkable. When we were planning this presentation and considering opening it up, I felt like there was something that one of us needed to share that would inspire all of us, and that was beyond what I could have imagined. So thank you. Rebecca?
Yeah, thank you so much, Marianne. That was beautiful. I'll just close by saying this is a quote from President Michelle Craig. She said, "Sometimes when I have an impression to do something for someone, I wonder if it was a prompting or just my own thoughts. But we need to remember that which is of God inviteth and enticeth to do good continually. Wherefore everything which inviteth and enticeth to do good and to love God and to serve him is inspired of God." And my just final quote that I wanted to share here is from another General Relief Society president, President Eliza Roxy Snow. She said, "Tell the sisters to go forth and discharge their duties in humility and faithfulness, and the Spirit of God will rest upon them, and they will be blessed in their labors. Let them seek for wisdom instead of power, and they will have all the power they need. They will have all the power they have wisdom to exercise." Lorianne.
Thanks, Rebecca. So we just wanted to end. I had my favorite mission companion would say, if you have something that you think is an impression, even if you don't know if it's an impression, to follow it, because the Lord will recognize that and give you more. And so Rebecca and I hope that you have had impressions during this talk that either help you to identify your calls or to continue or to pivot. But we encourage and challenge you to accept those calls, those secular calls that the Spirit and the Lord has given you, so that you can forward the kingdom here. And we leave that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful, ladies. Oh my gosh. And also thank you, Marianne, for sharing your story with us. What we will ask you guys to do at this time, you get to choose to leave the room, but we leave inspired. I love November. We tend to think about how we can be more thankful. I also like to use November as my prep time for the next year, and you have very much inspired me to be more and do more, and be so very, very grateful to get to be a female attorney of faith, and that we truly understand the magnificent call that is. So thank you so much. And we will now have you go to probably the lower right-hand corner and choose to leave the room and join us in the main session. So thank you so very much.